We're going to focus on these latest developments now with Middle East analyst David Aaron Miller. David, thanks for joining us. These exchanges took place unusually late at night. The previous exchanges all happened during the day. Is there any significance to the fact that this happened overnight?
No, I think it just reflects how difficult implementing this agreement is. There have been any number of violations that both sides have accused the other. We're now, though, at the end of phase one. And there are only three ways to go on this. Number one, a negotiated arrangement which fulfills the end of phase two and ends the war, freeing all the hostages with large numbers of Palestinian prisoners. Number two, an extension of phase one. Or number three, a return to military activities and an return of the Israeli campaign in Gaza. And I suspect since Ramadan is almost upon us and Hamas wants a quiet Ramadan for Palestinians in Gaza, that very likely an extension of phase one. But disagreement, again, let's be clear, is living on borrowed time.
Even today, Israel said it would not withdraw from a strategic corridor in the Gaza Strip as is called for by the ceasefire. I mean, why not? And what kind of effect could that have?
They're obligated to withdraw between day 42 of the ceasefire, which I believe is Saturday, and day 50, which I think is March 8 or 9. Look, the prime minister has basically turned the Philadelphia corridor into the fulcrum of Western civilization. He's publicly and repeatedly made clear how important this is for Israeli security. I think that the Israelis will use this as leverage, frankly, in an effort to move Hamas to go to an extended phase one. And the Americans, I think, for want of a better alternative, will accept the notion that maybe you can get a few more weeks out of this, maybe through the end of Ramadan, through the better part of the month of March. But at some point, there is a moment of truth coming. I just don't think that either side is going to implement phase two. The lifts are simply too heavy. Hamas will not return all of the hostages until it gets ironclad guarantees that Israel will withdraw from Gaza and end the war. No one is going to give Hamas those guarantees. And the government of Israel, this government, in no way, shape, or form, will agree to leave Gaza without a security architecture. And that's why this is so difficult. Maybe the Arab states could come up with a framework, but this is going to be a week-by-week deal as we move forward.
You mentioned the Arab state, and Egypt has had a role as a key mediator here. I mean, how much pressure has Egypt put on Hamas, and can it put enough pressure on Hamas to actually move forward?
Well, moving forward means one of two or three things. It means giving up governing of Gaza, which I think Hamas is prepared to do. The key issue for Hamas is maintaining their weapons. That's a key pressure point and form of influence, as is the thousands of Hamas employees, which have now filled in behind withdrawing Israeli forces. Egypt can pressure Gaza, but the pressure is going to be limited. It may well be if all of the key Arab states, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Egyptians, the Saudis, Jordanians, create some sort of pathway forward that's acceptable to Israel, maybe you can pressure Hamas. I'd remind your viewers, though, it was France that deployed troops to Beirut in 1982 when the U.S. brokered an agreement to see the extrication of the PLO, including Yasser Arafat, from Beirut, in addition to almost as many as 14,000 Palestinian and Syrian fighters. So the expulsion of the senior leadership in Gaza is on the table, at least as far as the Israelis are concerned. But there is precedent for removing a Palestinian organization from the Middle East, and France played a very important role in that diplomatic achievement.
So this latest exchange comes just one day after those incredibly emotional pictures we saw of the funerals of Shari Bibas, the former Israeli hostage, and her two young children. All three of them were killed in captivity. Thousands of people turned out to take part in the mourning. What kind of effect do you think that might be having on the general public in Israel?
I think it hardens the mood. I think the Israeli public, on one hand, wants to avenge the dead, to make sure that October 7th never happened. But by far, the vast majority of the Israeli public is much more focused on redeeming the living. And I think that pressure has not been able to move an Israeli government, which frankly is much more focused on eliminating Hamas as a political and military organization from Gaza, much more focused on that than it is redeeming the remaining hostages, as sad as it is to say. And that conundrum, that cruel dilemma, is going to continue to impact the Israeli public and Israeli political elites. The shadow of October 7th may well be 15 months ago, but it's going to remain heavy for years to come, and it will shape and affect the way the Israeli public deals with the whole question of a pathway to a broader Israeli-Palestinian settlement. So we've reached a sort of new phase in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has traumatized Palestinians, to be sure, and much of the Israeli public as well.
Aaron David Miller, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for having me.